The battlefield was dead silent. No voices, no orders, no footsteps of soldiers marching in rhythm. Only the sharp smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air. The sky above was gray with ash, and broken ships still smoldered in the distance. The war had torn everything apart, leaving nothing but ruins and silence. Sergeant Daniel Hayes walked slowly through the wreckage. His boots crunched over shattered glass and scorched earth. His uniform was torn, his arm bandaged in blood-soaked cloth, and his rifle was heavy in his hands. Every step was painful, but he kept moving. He didn't want to stop. He didn't want to think about the fact that his entire unit, his brothers in arms, were gone. He was alone now. Daniel had learned long ago that silence after a battle was more dangerous than the battle itself. Silence meant survivors hiding. Silence meant patrol searching. Silence meant ambushes waiting. He stayed sharp, eyes scanning every corner, finger ready on the trigger. Then he heard it. It wasn't the sound of a gun, not the crackle of fire, not the buzz of enemy drones. It was softer, fragile, like the faint whimper of a wounded creature. At first he thought it might be his imagination, a trick of his exhausted mind. But then he heard it again. A tiny trembling cry carried on the smoky air. Daniel froze. Slowly he turned toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. He followed it past a burned-out vehicle, past twisted steel beams, until he reached a collapsed section of wall. He pushed aside a broken panel, and there, curled up in the dust, was a child. The sight nearly stopped his heart. She was small, no older than 6 or 7 by human measure, with soft reddish fur matted with soot and blood. Her golden eyes were wide with terror. One of her ears was torn, and her tiny hands clutched a burnt toy, something that had once been a stuffed animal but was now almost unrecognizable. She was Vulpine. The enemy's people. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to be careful. The war had been brutal, and both sides had lost too much. But when he looked at her, he didn't see the enemy. He didn't see politics, he didn't see soldiers, he didn't see war. He saw a terrified child who had lost everything. Slowly, Daniel lowered his rifle and knelt down. His voice was calm, gentle, though his throat was dry and cracked. "Hey, it's all right. I won't hurt you." The child flinched at his voice, hugging the burnt toy tighter. She whispered something in her language. Words Daniel couldn't fully understand, but he caught the tone. It was fear. It was grief. It was loneliness. Daniel knew he should walk away. The battlefield was no place for hesitation, no place for weakness. But he couldn't. He couldn't turn his back on her. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a canteen. Unscrewing the cap, he offered it to her. The child hesitated. Her golden eyes studied him for a long moment, searching for danger, searching for lies. Then slowly she reached out with trembling hands and took the water. She drank greedily, coughing halfway, then pressed the canteen back to her chest like it was a treasure. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. She had no one, no parents, no soldiers, no one to protect her, only rubble and fire. He glanced around the ruined street. If any patrol, human or Vulpine, found her, they wouldn't care that she was a child. She wouldn't survive an hour on her own. Daniel clenched his jaw. His body was screaming for rest, but his heart was louder. He reached out gently, brushing ash from her fur, and whispered again, "You're not alone anymore." She didn't understand the words. Not fully, but she understood his tone. Slowly, carefully, she crawled toward him and clung to his torn sleeve. In that moment, Daniel Hayes made a silent promise. He would protect her, no matter what it cost. The night was cold. Smoke still drifted across the ruins, and distant explosions shook the ground. Daniel Hayes moved carefully through the shattered streets, his rifle ready in one hand, the small Vulpine child carried in his other arm. She was light, far too light. Hunger and fear had already drained her small body. She clung to him with surprising strength, her small claws gripping his torn uniform as if letting go meant death. Every time a distant boom echoed, she buried her face into his shoulder, trembling. Daniel adjusted his hold, speaking softly, though he knew she barely understood. "Easy, kid. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." She didn't answer, but the way she rested her head against him told him she understood enough. The war zone was not safe for anyone, let alone a child. Patrols from both sides moved through the ruins, searching for survivors, deserters, or anyone unlucky enough to be caught in their path. Daniel knew that if either army saw him carrying a Vulpine child, they would kill them both. To humans, she was the enemy's offspring. To Vulpines, she was a traitor for being with him. There was no safe choice. Only forward. Daniel pulled the torn edge of his cloak and wrapped it around the girl, hiding her form against his chest. Her fur tickled his neck as she curled closer. She was quiet now, trusting him. The trust of a child, so fragile, so absolute. It weighed heavier on Daniel than the rifle on his back. He moved through back alleys and broken corridors. Buildings once filled with families were nothing but hollow shells. He saw burnt furniture, broken toys, and once the tiny skeleton of a dog. He turned his eyes away quickly. The child didn't need to see more death. To distract her from the silence, Daniel began to talk. His voice was low, steady, almost like he was telling a bedtime story. Back on Earth, we've got oceans, kid. Big ones, blue as the sky. You'd like it there, I think. Waves crashing, birds flying overhead. Not like this. The child tilted her head, golden eyes peeking at him curiously. She didn't understand the words, but the gentle rhythm of his voice calmed her. She hugged her burnt toy tighter, as though imagining the world he described. Hours passed, and Daniel's body grew weaker. His wounds ached, and the lack of food gnawed at him. But every time his legs wanted to give out, he looked at the little one in his arms. She gave him strength he didn't know he had left. At one point, they stumbled into an abandoned bunker. The air smelled of damp and rust, but at least it was shelter. Daniel set her down gently and searched the area. He found an old ration pack, half ruined but still edible. He tore it open and offered the soft pieces of dried bread to her. She ate quickly, eyes wide with hunger. Then, to his surprise, she broke off a small piece and pushed it into his hand. Daniel froze, staring at her. She was starving, yet she still wanted to share. His chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Finally, he gave her a small smile. Thank you. He ate the piece she offered, not because it filled him, but because it meant something. Because she wanted him to live too. When night fully fell, Daniel knew they couldn't stay long. Patrols used the dark to hunt. He made a bed of cloth and rubble for her, and when she lay down, she tugged at his arm until he sat beside her. Her small paw rested on his sleeve, making sure he wouldn't leave. Daniel stayed awake, his rifle across his lap, watching the doorway. He listened to her breathing slow, watched her small chest rise and fall. Despite the chaos outside, despite the blood on his hands and the weight of war, something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He whispered to the sleeping child, his voice rough but full of quiet determination. I'll get you through this, kid, no matter what it takes. And with those words, Daniel promised himself that the journey had only just begun. Morning came with fire-colored light breaking through the smoke. Daniel Hayes had not slept. His eyes were heavy, but his hand still gripped the rifle across his lap. The small Vulpine child lay curled against his side, fast asleep, her little paw still clutching his sleeve, even in dreams. He knew they could not stay long. Patrols moved early, sweeping the ruins for survivors. If they were found, there would be no mercy. Time to move, kid, Daniel whispered, brushing ash from her fur. She blinked awake, rubbing her eyes with small paws, then looked up at him with quiet trust. She didn't cry, didn't resist, she just climbed onto his back when he bent down, wrapping her arms around his neck. And so, the journey continued. They passed through cracked streets, stepping over rubble and broken glass. The silence was sharp, the kind of silence that made every creak, every footstep sound like thunder. Daniel's soldier instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. And then he saw them. Up ahead, 6 Vulpine soldiers moved in a line across the street. Their rifles glinted in the morning light, and their golden eyes scanned every shadow. They were experienced, soldiers who knew how to track, how to kill. Daniel's breath caught. His heart beat like a drum in his chest. If they saw the child with him, they would not hesitate. To them, she was a liability. To them, a human carrying a Vulpine child could only mean betrayal. The little one must have sensed the danger too. She tightened her grip around his shoulders, her body trembling against him. Her golden eyes grew wide with fear. Daniel whispered, "Shh, it's all right. I've got you." He pressed a finger to his lips, and though she didn't fully understand, she nodded quickly, her tiny paw copying the gesture. Daniel scanned the ruins quickly, searching for a place to hide her. His eyes landed on a half-collapsed wall, rubble piled high around it. It was dangerous, but it could hide her small form. Gently, he pulled her down from his back and crouched in front of her. His voice was low, urgent but kind. "Stay here, don't move, no sound, I'll be back." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She shook her head, clinging to his arm. Fear poured out of her, raw and desperate. Daniel's heart twisted. He wanted to tell her he would never leave. But if he didn't draw the soldiers away, they would both die. He placed his hand against her cheek, his calloused palm soft against her fur. "I promise," he said, steady and sure. "I'll come back for you." Something in his tone reached her. She sniffled, nodded weakly, and let him go. He covered her with pieces of debris, arranging the rubble so it would block her heat signature from scanners. Only her golden eyes peeked out from the shadows, watching him. Then Daniel stepped out into the street. The Vulpine patrol stopped immediately, rifles snapping up to aim at him. The leader barked words in their harsh tongue, words Daniel didn't understand completely, but the meaning was clear. "Surrender." Daniel raised his weapon slowly. His body screamed with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp. He couldn't surrender. If they found the girl, they would kill her. He fired a single shot, not at them, but at the ground near their feet. Dust and rubble exploded upward. The soldiers ducked instinctively, and in that instant, Daniel sprinted down the alley. Gunfire erupted behind him, tearing through walls and shattering stone. Bullets whistled past his ears, one grazing his shoulder and ripping through flesh. Pain flared hot, but he didn't stop. He darted around corners, knocking over debris to slow them, forcing them to chase him. Every step was agony. His lungs burned, blood soaked into his sleeve, but he kept running. Not for himself, for her. For the child waiting in the rubble. Finally, after long minutes of chaos, the sound of pursuit faded. Daniel collapsed against a broken wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He stayed still, forcing his breathing to slow, listening for footsteps. Nothing. He had lost them. Hours later, when the sun had shifted high in the sky, Daniel returned to the place where he had hidden her. His chest tightened with fear. What if they had found her? What if she had panicked and run? He pulled back the rubble, and there she was. Her eyes were wet, her tiny body shaking, but she was there, waiting. When she saw him, she didn't hesitate. She rushed forward and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Daniel held her close, his voice rough but steady. "See? I told you. I'd come back." And for the first time since the war began, Daniel allowed himself a small, tired smile. The days dragged on, one after another, as Daniel Hayes carried the child through the ruins. His wounded shoulder throbbed with every movement, but he refused to let the pain slow him. The Vulpine girl was always clinging to him, riding on his back when her legs grew too tired, or holding his hand when the ground was flat enough for her to walk. The silence of the city pressed in on them. Broken towers leaned like the bones of giants. Windows gaped like empty eyes. Once this place had been alive with families, laughter, and trade. Now it was nothing but ash, and food was running out. Daniel checked his last ration pack one night, crouched inside the hollow of a collapsed bunker. There wasn't much left, just a few strips of dried meat and some powder that could be mixed with water. It wouldn't last more than a day. He stared at it, jaw tight. The child sat across from him, hugging her burnt toy, her eyes following his every move. She was hungry. He could see it in the way her ears drooped, in the way she tried not to stare at the food too long. Daniel sighed and tore the packet open. He gave almost everything to her, keeping only the smallest piece for himself. She looked at him, surprised, and then quickly shook her head. With her tiny paws, she broke off a piece of the food and pressed it into his hand. Daniel froze. For a moment, his throat closed and he couldn't speak. She was starving, and yet she wanted to share. "Kid." His voice was hoarse. He tried to give it back, but she shook her head fiercely, golden eyes flashing with stubbornness. Then she pushed the piece into his mouth with her little paw. Daniel chewed slowly, swallowing against the lump in his throat. He reached out and ruffled her fur gently. "Thank you. You're stronger than me, you know that?" She didn't understand the words, but she understood his tone. She gave a small smile, weak but real. The next morning they moved again. Hunger gnawed at Daniel's stomach, but he ignored it. His only concern was keeping her alive. Sometimes he carried her, sometimes she walked beside him, clutching his hand tightly. To keep her spirits up, Daniel told her stories. His voice was rough and cracked, but he tried to paint pictures of a world beyond the war. "On Earth," he told her softly, "there are forests bigger than cities. Green leaves everywhere. The air smells fresh, not like this smoke. You'd love it there." The girl tilted her head, golden eyes fixed on him. She didn't understand all the words, but her small smile told him she believed in the world he described. That gave Daniel strength. One afternoon, they stumbled upon a ruined market. Broken stalls stood in crooked lines and shattered crates littered the ground. Daniel searched desperately. Most of the food had long since been taken, but luck was with them. In a dark corner, hidden beneath fallen boards, he found a stash of canned supplies, dusty, dented, but still good. He almost laughed with relief. Carrying the cans back, he showed them to the girl. Her eyes lit up, her tail swishing weakly with excitement. Together they ate in silence, savoring every bite. For the first time in days, Daniel felt his body grow a little stronger. That night, she curled against his side as they rested under the broken roof of a store. Her breathing was steady, her body warm against him. Daniel stayed awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. It was strange. Before this, he had thought he was done for. Alone, wounded, lost, he had no reason to keep going. But now, with her small body leaning against him, he felt something different. A reason to move forward. A reason to live. Before sleep took him, he whispered into the darkness. "You're not just surviving, kid. You're giving me hope, too." The little one stirred, half asleep, and pressed closer to him, and Daniel Hayes realized that in the middle of war, with nothing left but ruins and ash, hope could be found in the smallest, most fragile hands. The ruins finally began to thin. For days, Daniel Hayes had carried the child through broken streets, past collapsed towers and over fields of ash. Now at last he saw the edge of the war zone. Beyond the jagged remains of buildings lay open ground, and in the distance smoke rising in straight, steady lines. That meant camps. That meant people. The girl on his back stirred, her small paws tightening around his shoulders. She had grown quieter these last few days, but her golden eyes still burned with determination. When she saw the distant smoke, she made a soft sound, a hopeful whimper as if she too sensed safety was near. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that the worst was behind them. But a soldier's instincts never lied. Safety was never certain until you were inside its walls. They reached the outskirts by nightfall. Ahead stood a checkpoint, marked by scavenged barricades and flickering lamps. Armed men stood guard, their armor mismatched, their flags missing. Daniel knew the type instantly, mercenaries. Not official soldiers, not peacekeepers, just men who sold their loyalty to whoever paid more. He slowed his steps. His grip on the girl shifted, protective. She sensed his unease, pressing her face into his neck. "Stay calm," he whispered to her, though the words were as much for himself. One of the mercenaries spotted them and barked a laugh. Soon half a dozen guns were pointed their way. "Well, look what we've got here," one sneered. His accent was rough, his uniform patched with stolen insignias. A human soldier limping in from the ruins. "Thought you were all dead." Daniel raised his free hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm passing through, looking for evacuation routes." The man's eyes narrowed, then dropped to the child clinging to his back. His grin widened cruelly. "And what's this? You carrying a fox cub now?" The other mercenaries laughed, circling closer. Their boots scraped on the broken concrete, weapons gleaming under the lamplight. "She's just a kid," Daniel said firmly. His voice was low, steady, but his pulse raced in his veins. "She's not a threat." "She's a fox," the mercenary spat on the ground. "And foxes grow up to slit human throats." "You know it. We all know it." Daniel shifted, putting himself between them and the girl, His body ached, his wounds throbbed, but his stance was unyielding. "Then you'll have to go through me first." The air grew tense. Fingers twitched over triggers. The child whimpered softly, sensing the danger, her little claws digging into Daniel's torn uniform. The mercenary leader stepped closer, his smirk sharp and mocking. "Why, Sergeant? Why protect her? Is your mind gone? Or maybe you forgot who the enemy is?" Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't lower his eyes, didn't step back. "She's not the enemy. She's just a child, innocent." The words didn't move them. One of the mercenaries raised his rifle, the barrel aimed straight at the little one's head. The girl froze, trembling violently, a soft cry escaping her throat. Something inside Daniel snapped. His body shifted instantly, stepping fully in front of her, shielding her with his own chest. "Put it down," he growled. His voice carried not just anger, but something deeper. Promise. The mercenary's smile faltered, but his finger tightened on the trigger. And then it happened. The child, so small and fragile, stepped out from behind Daniel's legs. Her paws shook, her torn ear drooped, but her golden eyes glowed with courage. She looked at the mercenaries, then tugged at Daniel's sleeve and whispered in broken, halting human words. Family." The laughter died. The mocking sneers faded into uneasy silence. The mercenaries shifted, some glancing at each other. A child's voice, full of fear but also full of truth, carried more weight than Daniel's rifle ever could. For a moment, even the mercenary leader looked uncertain. His jaw worked as if chewing on doubt. But mercenaries were wolves, and wolves fed on weakness. One spat on the ground. "Family or not, she's still vermin." He raised his weapon again, and Daniel's heart turned to fire. His grip tightened on his rifle, his eyes hardened. He had been willing to talk, to reason, to hold back, but not anymore. No one was going to hurt her, not while he still breathed. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Guns pointed, breath held. The small Vulpine child's whisper, family, still hung in the air like a fragile thread. But the mercenaries were not men of compassion. Their laughter had only paused, not vanished. One of them spat and lifted his rifle higher. "Family, doesn't matter. A fox is a fox. They all burn the same." Daniel Hayes felt something harden inside him. The pain in his body, the exhaustion in his limbs, the hunger clawing at his stomach, all of it disappeared. What remained was only one truth. If they wanted her, they'd have to kill him first. He shifted, placing himself squarely in front of the child, his eyes like steel. His voice was low, a growl of warning. "Put the weapon down," the mercenary smirked. "Or what, Sergeant? You're one man against 6. You can't win." Daniel's finger tightened on his rifle. His answer was cold and final. "Watch me." The first shot cracked like thunder. Daniel moved faster than the mercenaries expected. His rifle barked once, and the man aiming at the child dropped to the ground, lifeless. Chaos exploded instantly. Shouts, curses, and the roar of gunfire filled the air. The child screamed, covering her ears, crouching low behind Daniel's legs. Bullets tore through the barricades, sparks flying, stone shattering. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired back, each shot precise, each movement fueled not by training alone, but by desperation. He wasn't fighting for a mission. He wasn't fighting for orders. He was fighting for her. 2 mercenaries rushed forward, blades drawn when their rifles jammed. Daniel met them head-on. His rifle swung like a club, cracking into one man's jaw with a sickening crunch. He turned, using the butt of the weapon to smash the second across the temple. Pain ripped through his wounded shoulder, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Blood ran down his arm, soaking into his sleeve, but rage kept him standing. The leader shouted, firing wildly. Bullets grazed Daniel's side, tearing cloth and skin. He staggered but held firm, planting himself like an unbreakable wall in front of the child. The girl sobbed, clutching her burnt toy tight, her golden eyes watching through tears as the man who had carried her this far fought like a storm of fury. One mercenary managed to grab Daniel from behind, an arm locking around his throat. Daniel gasped, struggling for breath. Another raised a knife ready to strike. But Daniel roared, slamming his elbow into the attacker's ribs until the grip loosened. He spun, grappling with both men, the knife slicing his arm but missing his heart. With sheer strength, he drove the blade into one and kicked the other into the barricade. Every muscle screamed. His body was broken, bleeding, weak. But his will was stronger than all of it. Because she was behind him. Because she was counting on him. When the smoke cleared, only 2 mercenaries remained, the leader and one shaken man who hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. Daniel stood chest heaving, blood dripping from wounds across his body. His rifle was nearly empty, but his hands didn't tremble. The leader snarled, "You'd kill your own kind for her? For a fox?" Daniel's reply was sharp as a blade. "For her life?" "Yes," the leader screamed and charged, firing wildly. Daniel dropped low, rolling to the side. His last bullet struck true, hitting the man square in the chest. The leader stumbled, dropped his weapon, and fell. The final mercenary froze. His rifle shook in his hands. He looked at Daniel, then at the child. Fear won over greed. He dropped his weapon and ran into the night. Silence returned. Smoke drifted across the checkpoint. Bodies lay still, their laughter silenced forever. Daniel stood swaying, barely holding himself upright. His wounds burned, his breath came ragged, but he was alive. The child rushed to him, tears streaking her fur. She pressed her small body against his leg, as if trying to hold him together with her tiny arms. Daniel knelt slowly, his strength failing, and cupped her face with bloodied hands. His voice was rough but steady. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm still here. You're safe." Her golden eyes shimmered with tears, but also with something stronger. Not fear this time. Something else. Trust. For a moment, the world was quiet again. Not the silence of death, but the silence after a storm. And though Daniel knew his body couldn't last much longer, he also knew he had done what he promised. He had protected her. The night after the battle was cold. Smoke still hung in the air, drifting from the ruined checkpoint. Daniel Hayes sat against a broken wall, his uniform torn, blood soaking into the dirt beneath him. His chest rose and fell heavily, each breath sharp with pain. Beside him, the Vulpine child curled up, her small body pressed close, as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. Her burnt toy lay in her lap, and her golden eyes blinked slowly, too tired to cry anymore. Daniel looked down at her, his vision blurring from both exhaustion and blood loss. He brushed a strand of fur from her face with trembling fingers. "We made it, kid," he whispered, voice low and ragged. "We're still standing." The child lifted her head. Her voice was soft, broken, but steady. You stay?" He smiled weakly. It wasn't the smile of a soldier. It was the smile of a man who had found something worth protecting. "I'll stay, as long as I can." The stars above glimmered faintly, hidden behind smoke and clouds, but Daniel looked at them anyway. Memories flickered in his mind, his old squad, the orders that led them into hell, the families he could never save. So much had been taken by war. So many voices lost, and yet in this shattered place he had saved one small life, one fragile spark that would live because he refused to let go. Maybe, he thought, that was enough. The child tugged on his sleeve. "Why?" she asked, her voice innocent, confused. "Why protect me? You human, fox enemy." Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her. "Because you're not my enemy," he said gently. "You're a child. You deserve a chance to grow, to laugh, to live. Doesn't matter if you're fox, human, or anything else. You're you, and that's worth fighting for." The girl pressed her small hand against his chest where blood still seeped. Her eyes welled with tears again. "But you hurt. You die." Daniel chuckled softly, though it ended in a cough. "Hurts, yeah. But dying, not yet. Not while you still need me." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the child bury her face in his chest, holding him tighter than before. Hours passed slowly. Daniel fought to stay awake, but the pain kept pulling him under. Each time his head fell forward, the child shook him gently, whispering, "Stay. Please stay." And each time he forced his eyes open and smiled for her. Still here, but deep inside he knew his strength was fading. His body was broken. No soldier could survive wounds like his for long. Yet he also knew this truth. If he gave up now, she would be alone again. That thought alone kept him alive. At dawn, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed faintly. Daniel lifted his rifle with the last of his strength, aiming at the shadows. The child pressed against him, afraid, but the figures that stepped through the smoke were not mercenaries. They were soldiers, Vulpine soldiers, dressed in dark armor, weapons ready. They froze when they saw the sight. A human soldier, broken and bleeding, shielding one of their own children with his body. One of the Vulpine officers lowered his weapon, eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" he muttered. The child stood shakily, her small voice cutting through the silence. Eam saved me. Human saved me. The soldiers glanced at each other, then at Daniel. Some looked uncertain, others suspicious. But the child's trembling body pressed protectively against him said more than words ever could. Daniel let out a long breath. Relief washed over him, though he knew he wouldn't live much longer. His hand brushed the child's fur one last time. "You're safe now," he whispered. "They'll take you home." Her golden eyes filled with tears. "No, don't leave. You promise?" "Stay," Daniel swallowed hard. His chest burned. His strength slipped away. He wanted so badly to keep that promise, but he knew the truth. Still, he smiled for her even as darkness closed in. "I'll stay here. In your heart." Always her small hand clutched his. She cried, shaking her head. But even through her tears, she whispered back, voice breaking, "Always." When Daniel's eyes finally closed, he wasn't alone. He wasn't just a soldier in a war. He was a protector, a guardian, a man who gave everything so one small life could see tomorrow. And for the rest of her days, the Vulpine child remembered him, not as an enemy, not as a human soldier, but as family, the one who kept his promise with his life, the one who showed her that humanity was not cruelty, but love.